Just take the leap and be an entrepreneur. Well, I mean, be realistic about it, right? Like, if you really love what you're doing, it won't feel like a chore. And yeah, it might be a struggle for a while if you're doing it on the side, but hopefully eventually that pays off and you'll be able to, take that leap.
Welcome to the Architect My Life podcast. I'm Aya Shlachter, your host, CEO of MGS Global Group, supporting architecture and design firms. We provide BIM modeling and drafting services to overwhelmed architects and design firm owners. On my podcast, I talk to successful women firm owners and entrepreneurs to discuss their challenges, share our experiences, and above all, celebrate each other's success. My core business, MGS Global, started as a part-time gig when I was a new mom. It has now grown to a thriving business, providing architectural support to the creatives, which helps everyone maintain a healthy work-life balance. The Architect My Life podcast is where I hope you learn to achieve your goals through genuine stories and conversations with other successful women in the industry. Now let's dive into this episode. Hi everyone, our guest this week is Aimon Ali. Aimon is a fashion entrepreneur and an experienced fashion runway show producer, stylist, and creative director from Toronto, Canada, now based in Cleveland, Ohio. She has produced fashion events in Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, and Vancouver for nearly a decade and is passionate about the elegance of high-end fashion. After her move to Cleveland, she started exploring the creative industry in search of the fashion showcases she loved and was used to. She soon realized there was something missing. Cleveland was filled with amazing creatives with some amazing work, but no outlet when it came to elevated fashion. She made it her goal to bring elevated, inclusive, and diverse fashion events to Cleveland through her new venture, Fashion Talks. Fashion Talks not only produces events in Cleveland, New York, and other states, but also offers services for creative businesses. All right, welcome, Aimon. Aimon Ali, I'm so excited you're on my podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited as well.
I would like to hear more about your origin story and what brought you to Cleveland.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm Canadian. I grew up around Toronto in the GTA area. And really, I moved to Cleveland about 4 years ago because I got married. My husband is from Cleveland and I did the move. So that's how I ended up in Cleveland.
So, Aimon, what sparked your interest in fashion?
So when I look back at it, I feel like it's quite a clear path, but I don't think I realized it when, I was growing up. Like, I always loved fashion. I always knew I wanted to do something different, but I didn't know what. And I actually was a psychology major in university. I wanted to work with children with developmental disabilities because I thought fashion psych would be so cool to go into, but Canada doesn't really have a big fashion psych market. It's in America and in England, and I'm like, I'm not really going to move to either of those countries, so I'm going to do developmental psych. But on the side, along the way, I fell into the fashion world. I started volunteering at the Fashion Association at my university and volunteering at just like shows in the community. Like in Toronto, I would email designers and be like, hey, do you need a volunteer? And people started reaching out to me, and then I ended up becoming the president of my fashion association at my university. I ended up getting a lot more work in the actual industry too. Like, people started knowing me, and I was helping with like model castings and designer outreach, and then eventually ended up producing shows.
So this was all when you were in college?
It was, yeah. So, okay, in Canada, college and university are two very different things.
Oh.
Yeah, I know in America they're like kind of interchangeable, but for us they're different because you cannot get a bachelor. You can't get a degree in college. You can only get a diploma. But in university, you can get a degree. Does that make sense? Like, you can't get a BA in college.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So yeah, so during university, I just fell into fashion, and it like kind of really grew a lot. And that's when Instagram was also growing, and I kind of became an influencer on the side. I started styling. I started, doing more events, but I was still studying psychology.
Wow, that's interesting. So what type of events or things were you able to produce in university?
So I think one of the first things I did was I produced a larger show for the Fashion Association at my university in collaboration with one of the children's hospital. Like, the funds were going to charity, but on the side I started getting involved with events in Toronto, like Fashion Art Toronto, Toronto Men's Fashion Week, Toronto Women's Fashion Week, Startup Fashion Week, just private and public events that were fashion related. And I would, I started off as a normal volunteer, and then I ended up being like the designer, lead coordinator, or on the model outreach team. And then I started working with Startup Fashion Week, and I ended up becoming the runway show coordinator for them in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. So, it was all about events around business, fashion, and technology.
How old were you then?
Oh my God. I was young. Now that I think about it, I did a lot. Like, I just did as much as I could get my hands on. I was probably like late teens, and then early 20s. Yeah, because I mean, I moved to Cleveland when I was 24, I think, or 23. So all of that was before then.
Wow, you are amazing, Aimon. The things that Aimon has done, we'll share it in our show notes. But if you look at her Instagram and social media, like you would think she would be in fashion for the last 20 years and in New York City. So Cleveland is really happy to have you. So tell me about your path from psychology to a full-time fashion entrepreneur. How did all that happen?
So originally, my thought was to keep both of them in Canada. I was doing both of them. So I was studying psych. I started interning at the hospital that was my goal. I wanted to work at this one children's hospital. So I'm like, okay, I finished my degree. I did a specialization. I started interning there. On the side, I would do, fashion week events, other fashion events, and I started getting more work in fashion, like styling, influencer things, invites for events, and I was able to balance both because I really enjoyed both. It's not like I didn't like psych; I really enjoyed psychology as well. And then I started my first business. It was like a PR company in Canada, and I got a part-time position at the hospital that I was interning at, and I was super excited because I'm like, this is perfect. I'm doing what I want in fashion, and I'm doing what I want in psych. And then that's when I actually moved to Cleveland. So when I moved to Cleveland, I was still flying back or driving back to Canada for the fashion events. And I tried to find a fashion scene here because I was, I would still love to do something creative. But for me, it was okay back then because I'm like, well, I'll go to Canada when I have to do my creative stuff. And I'm just going to look for more of a health related, like, hospital job here in Cleveland because there's so many hospitals here. There's so many people within the healthcare industry, which I didn't know at all. I didn't really know anything about Cleveland until I moved here. But once the pandemic hit, that's when I reevaluated a lot of things. Also, just living in Cleveland, it was very different coming from a big city. So I really thought about, do I want to work a 9 to 5 now that like I lost my social life, right? Like I didn't have my social, I didn't have my family, I didn't have so much. All of a sudden I came to this new country, this new city, and the healthcare system here is different too. It's private, it's not public. So there was a lot of changes and a lot of me trying to figure out, okay, what do I want to do in the future? Especially since Cleveland doesn't seem to have a fashion industry. But I wasn't really liking the healthcare job I got here. So that transition kind of pushed me to being like, you know what, I think I can take fashion and go full time.
So, what year was that you moved to Cleveland?
2018, like right before the pandemic.
So, Eamon moved here 2018. Took 2 years of the pandemic, really, of doing nothing. Tell us about how you landed this major or how you curated this huge fashion show at the Cleveland Art Museum.
Yeah.
I mean, from someone who just moved in 2018 to this massive fashion show in the Cleveland Art Museum. Can you tell us about how you got there?
Yeah, for sure. So it was a little different because I moved in 2018. I started my first business, which was Nomia Studio. It was a online accessories boutique. I just wanted something where I'm like, I want to connect with people, socialize more. So what's something I can do? I love jewelry, so I started like a little boutique, and I used to do pop-ups. And I was working my healthcare job like 9 to 5, and I really didn't like my job. So as my brand was doing better, I was like, you know what? I would love to throw events here in Cleveland because I was meeting so many amazing people, like designers and models and women entrepreneurs. There's so many women entrepreneurs in Cleveland, just like you and me. You know what I mean? There's so many of us. And I was like, I would love to do like a little workshop for women. And it was going to be like a little panel. I started planning it. I quit my job and I started planning the event, and the pandemic hit.
Oh.
Literally, the week I was reserving this venue, everything shut down. We went into lockdown.
Oh.
So I had to pivot and I had to think, okay, no one's going to buy accessories. I'm not going back to a job in a hospital because it's COVID. What am I going to do? So that's when I kind of took a break and I pivoted and I started my accounting and bookkeeping business, Accounting Babes, because I'm like, okay, well, people are still needing accounting and bookkeeping services. But I was really trying to focus on like fashion talks. Like I had the idea in my head, but it wasn't something before the pandemic. And then as I virtually met people during the pandemic and saw what was happening, I just kept getting stronger in my belief that, you know what, I think I can do something in Cleveland because all of the the Canadian borders shut down. I couldn't go home. All of our fashion weeks were shut down. Like there's nothing going on in Canada, right? And in Cleveland, we came out of the pandemic much earlier than them. Like I think, we had like no mask mandate. We could do whatever, and they were still in their red zone. So I knew fashion events there, which is like 500 plus people in a room, were not happening. So I had to reevaluate. Am I gonna go back to Canada just to visit my family when it opens, or am I actually gonna do events there? Would I feel comfortable? So as soon as we kind of recovered from the pandemic, I was like, you know what? And I think this was 2020, end of 2020. I thought to myself, I'm going to do a proper high end elevated runway show. And either it's going to work because nobody's doing it, or it's not going to work because nobody's doing it. So in January, I did a small tester event. That was the first ever Fashion Talks event. It was a vision board event. I did it just to see if people were interested because I had already like created an Instagram and started branding and just getting people's attention. And we had it was like a sold out event. It was smaller, but it went really well. And so right after that, I was like, I'm gonna plan a show. I reached out to people that I knew that I was like, hey, do you want to be a model coordinator on my team? Hey, do you want to be the lead for hair and makeup? Like, I think you'd be amazing. And in 3 months, we produced our first show, which was at the Madison in Cleveland. And then after that, everything just went fast forward, and we produced our second show at the Cleveland Museum of Art just last June.
So how long did it take for you to plan everything?
So
for the Cleveland Museum of Art?
I'm going to tell you what I usually want and then what I realistically had. So usually I would love to have a year. For me, I'm someone that plans out my larger events a year in advance. Like that's what I did in Toronto. Here, I think I only had like 5 months to plan that event, which was crazy for me.
That is so impressive, Aimon. I actually saw the videos and I think you were in a lot of the news channels. And I'm also a recent Cleveland transplant. Well, not so recent, but I moved here in 2013. But, I barely, scratched the surface, unlike Aimon over here, who's trailblazing. Congratulations on all your success, Aimon. It's really, Cleveland is lucky to have you.
Thank you. They're so lucky to have you too. And I'm so lucky to have met you.
You're so sweet, Aimon. For those of you who don't know Aimon, she moved here to get married. I'm sure people will ask that question, like, why did she move? So she got married, so she's in Cleveland. So what are your exciting and current projects coming up?
We have a lot of exciting things happening. I think after 2 years of Fashion Talks, I'm really figuring out like what we truly are and what we truly can help, the Cleveland and greater fashion community with. And, in the last 2 years, we've only done like our major runway and then other smaller events, but, we are doing a little bit of a update to our brand. So, we will still be doing our events, but we also offer services that a lot of people don't know about. So we help with websites, branding. We do styled elevated shoots for brands and business owners. I do, consulting. We're really excited about those services because we want to be able to help, the Cleveland audience reach beyond. And we also hope to be expanding into New York area soon. So our first event in Manhattan is at the end of this month, at the end of October. which is when we're recording this. So we're really excited.
That's cool. So you have a fashion show in New York City. That's very exciting. And I look forward to seeing all the reels and your social media regarding that event. I have so many questions for Eamon. But another question that I have is how do you do everything so flawlessly? Like you look so graceful and you just put together a 600 person fashion show and you still have time to watch, K dramas, which we'll talk about later on. But how do you manage, Eamon?
I think for me, I'm just so used to it. Like growing up, and I think this was such a good thing, and I never realized my family was always very busy. Like my parents were social. We were always doing something. I don't think we were ever home on the weekends. Like we always had something going on. There was always someone coming over. My parents were always moving. We moved around a lot. So I think being able to manage a busier lifestyle with family, social life. I was studying in university. I had a part-time job. I worked in the fashion industry. I taught on Sundays. I still had a social life and a family life and a religious life. So I did a lot in Canada. I was like the most busiest person, but I managed it. So when I moved to Cleveland, all of a sudden I had so much time compared to my Canadian life. I had no friends here. My family wasn't here. Cleveland is not like a huge major city, so there's not as much going on in terms of like, fashion industry events because we don't really have that hard fashion industry here like New York or LA. So all of a sudden I had all this time, and for me I was like, I love throwing together events and producing stuff like this, and I want to do it my way. And for me it's very easy, but I've realized that a lot of people are like, well, how do you do it? Like it's so specific and it's so like elevated. And I'm like, yeah, I think it's just like I have this idea in my head and I know I'm going to make it come true, and I might not know how it's going to come true, but I have full faith that it's going to happen. My first show ever that I did here, I like told my husband, I was like, you know what? I'm going to get a venue. I'm going to get it partially or fully sponsored, and I'm going to have 300 people seated. And he's like, how are you going to do that? You only have 3 months. I'm like, I don't know how. Don't ask me how. I'm just going to do it. Like, I'm just going to start and I'm going to figure it out along the way. So for me, like, I always have like this bigger vision, and then the pieces just kind of fall into place. And I think it's just my aesthetic. I just go with like, if I wanted to attend this event, how would I want it? And I love super cute, super bougie. Like I just want an experience. Like I want to go somewhere and be able to take pictures, and I want to notice the details and be like, oh my God, that was so like thoughtful of them to think of the smallest detail. And I try to do that.
Yeah, I can't wait to attend your event next year. I think your event this year was at the same time as there was another event
Yeah,
too.
it's actually Father's Day.
Oh, it was Father's
So we
Day?
had
Yeah.
like and this was, I'm so honored. I'm so like just happy that our event was such a success, because not only was it Father's Day, it was also Juneteenth. And I think there was something else on that day. Like everything fell on the day of my event.
Okay, how many people came?
We had, I think, around 500 seated.
That's amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah. And I mean, our backstage team was huge. We had 86 models, 26 hair and makeup, not counting my team, the intern team, the photography team, the volunteers. Like, it was a lot of people in that venue. And I'm so grateful that all those people made that time in that day to spend it at my event.
So, what were the setbacks that you had encountered prior to the event? I mean, getting CMA is quite difficult to accomplish, especially for someone who just moved to Cleveland. So, how did all that happen? And how did you overcome all this setback, if any?
Oh my God, there were so many. I honestly, okay, so the story behind CMA is like this. So when I first moved to Cleveland, I went to the museum, and I love museums. And I found out that the one in Cleveland is free. And I was so shocked. I was like, why is it free? Like none of the Canadian museums are free, and they're always packed. So I walked into the CMA and I was like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. The atrium area, I'm like, imagine if there was a fashion show. That was like the first thing I thought. This was before I even thought about fashion talks. That was my idea. When I started fashion talks, I was like, it would be so cool. Maybe in 5 years, like my 5 year plan, I'm like, I would love to do a show at the CMA. Or even if they just know of my existence, I would be happy. But to be able to have done the show in my second year was crazy for me. Like, I couldn't even, like, I was just blown away because I finished my first show and I'm like, let me just try. Let me just try and see what they say. I was in talks with trying to confirm the venue from like, oh my God, like December. And I don't think I confirmed it until March.
Okay.
Or like a little bit before. But it took a lot of back and forth going through different teams. So that was a setback in terms of time. Like if I wish I had more time obviously to prepare. But a lot of setbacks are more like changing people's perspectives on the fashion industry and what I bring, right? Because I myself am, I'm a woman of color, I'm young, I look a certain way and then I sound a certain way. And there's different perceptions people have before you open your mouth and when you walk into a room. And usually I'm the only person that looks like this in a room. And it's hard sometimes when you're doing outreach for sponsors or collaborations, you really have to, I really feel like I have to go above and beyond because I'm so different. It's harder for people to understand. And on top of that, I'm doing something that's so different because every time I say fashion in Cleveland, people are like, what? And then I have to explain, a lot of times when I say I'm doing a runway or a fashion show, people are like, okay, where are you going to get the clothes? And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. I'm like, I'm producing this entire event. There's applications, designers apply, and they create clothing to be on the runway. Like, it is a whole production. Like, I have influencers and media, and we have model auditions, and it was just different than what people had experienced. So it was really like battling that like perception and trying to help people understand that we have this because I have such a large vision and I see it. And I realized that other people need to experience it to see it. And it was interesting because the first year I did the runway, my team really believed in my vision, but none of them had worked in the fashion industry except for like one or two of them had done like beauty or like hair and makeup. And once the show finished, one of my team members came up to me and he was like, Aimon, I totally believed in your vision. I didn't see it. He's like, I couldn't imagine what you were imagining, but being here, seeing the show happen, he's like, I see it, and this is so crazy. And I'm like, I'm so grateful that you believed in me and my vision, especially with me being new to Cleveland. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to help this girl out. I'm going to be part of her team. And then to see my vision actually come to life has been wild because I think once people come, they're always like, oh my God, this is the first time I've been to an actual fashion show. And then they walk away and they're like, wow, we get it now.
A lot of people start their businesses without a personal brand or without an audience, and it takes a while to actually build an audience to, prove your credibility and all that. But you've only been here a few years and you've already built an audience and your credibility and your tribe. Like, how do you foster relationships between your mentors and mentees and the students and the people who volunteer and your interns? A lot of people are probably on the wait list to intern with Aimon.
I just have some emails I have to get back to on that.
So my question for you is, for someone being so new here, how do you find these wonderful people that surround yourself with? Like, where do you find obviously you're an amazing human being, but yeah, talk to us about the process of building your tribe in Cleveland as a newcomer.
Honestly, I feel like if you're authentic and if you're just real and yourself, you attract the right people. There will always be people that you attract that won't always want the best for you, and you just need to learn how to filter them out. I always just put myself out there. Like from year one, when I came to Cleveland and I started Nomia Studio, I was like, I'm starting Nomia Studio. I'm going to go to pop-ups. I'm going to speak to people. I looked for events to attend and I would talk to people. I would network with people. I've met people in Cleveland because we started following each other on Instagram. It kind of helps that I'm an influencer because they feel more comfortable following me, asking me. Like I've had people DM me being like, hey, would love to grab coffee. I'm new here. Or I saw you're doing this. Would love to chat. And I feel like really putting yourself out there helps, especially if I'm not a shy person, but I'm an intimidating person, unfortunately. A lot of people find me very intimidating. So I always have to try to be like, I'm like a super nice person. I'm very approachable once you get to know me, but I know I come off as intimidating. So really like I would just talk to everybody. And the interesting thing was that I like did photo shoots and did little events and did pop-ups in the beginning before the pandemic, and I would just connect with everyone. And my rule is you never know who you're going to meet or who someone knows that might think of you. So I never really thought about like, oh, I don't want to meet this person. I just would talk to everyone. And when I sat down to think about who would be good to be part of my show or to invite. I already kind of knew all the people. And it wasn't on purpose. It was because I had just naturally networked with them. I just already, maybe I met someone and we had a great conversation on something and I followed them on Instagram and I just like their posts and interact. We don't always have to meet up. That's kind of the rule. It's like knowing the difference between who's your friends that you're hanging out with versus people in your network and in your, how do I say, just social sphere, right? Like I was attracting people who were maybe not in the fashion industry, but they were interested in fashion or they were fashionable themselves. So really just putting myself out there, trying to talk to people, other people connecting me with people, trying to reach out as an influencer, that kind of stuff helped.
So let's talk about being an entrepreneur. It seems like you are an entrepreneur by DNA. So who inspired you to become an entrepreneur?
I don't think it was a who, I think it was what. It was more of like what lifestyle did I want to maintain. I am a social person. I'm also religious and I love traveling and, I want to be able to travel whenever I want and I want to be able to get my religious holidays off. And I want to be able to control my lifestyle. So I think that was more of the pushing factor is I got a taste of it when I was younger and I was like, oh, I can't go back to a 9 to 5 because I don't want to be arguing with my employer about getting one holiday off. I don't share the same holidays with everybody, but I do want my holidays off. And like those small things just kept adding up, and I'm like, I need to do something where I have control because that's going to be the best way for me.
Wasn't your mom an entrepreneur as well?
She is now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so she owns a boutique now in Canada. She has a traditional South Asian wear boutique. And she's always been very entrepreneurial. Entrepreneurial. Totally butchering the word. Yeah, so now her business is doing great. But growing up, she didn't own a business.
Yeah. But I agree. I think part of what I love as an entrepreneur, even though sometimes we tend to work a lot, it's really our time freedom. And I started my business because I wanted to spend more time with my kids. In the beginning, it wasn't the case, but eventually I was able to balance that. And it's been a great journey.
And you enjoy what you do, right? I always say that. I'm like, yeah, I work a lot, but it doesn't feel like work to me because I love doing it. So it's okay if I work a lot.
So what's your advice for people who are not ready to take the big leap, but are at the cusp?
You don't have to. Like, keep your full-time or part-time job and do it on the side until, I think the rule is until you, like, double your income or something. That's, like, the safe rule. But, until you feel comfortable, like, obviously at the end of the day, we all have bills to pay. And I know, like, everybody's like, oh, yeah, like, just take the leap and be an entrepreneur. Well, be realistic about it, right? Like, write it down, write it on a piece of paper to look at it, right? So it can really hit you, like, okay, if I leave my job right now, can I pay my bills and feed myself? If the answer is no, then don't leave it. But if you really love what you're doing, it won't feel like a chore. And yeah, it might be a struggle for a while if you're doing it on the side. But hopefully eventually that pays off and you'll be able to, take that leap.
That's true. So when I first met Aimon, I just got back from the Philippines, like within a week. But I was, to be honest, intimidated. And I'm like, oh my God, I need to look a certain way. And I was really like, I was jet lagging still. And I'm like, I hope that...
You looked amazing.
Thanks, Aimon. And it's true, Aimon is very nice and kind and very authentic. And one day, this is one thing we have in common and I have to talk about it. She pulled out this stick. This pink stick. I'm like, oh my God, I saw that in this Korean drama that I'm watching, and we both did the same kind of woo to the woo to the woo. So we have this common interest, which is Korean drama, which is not unusual. A lot of people watch K-drama nowadays, but Aimon has taken it to the next level. Aimon, tell us about the fact that you speak Korean and you're head of the Korean club. Can you please explain?
Oh God. So this is just really random information, but this was before K-pop was like a whole thing. So when I was in university, I had a friend. She was an exchange student from Korea. She helped me learn some Korean. I helped her with English, and I eventually ended up learning the language, and it was really easy for me, and I loved it, and it was really cool. This was like guys, when I took Korean class, it was like 30 Korean kids and me. Like this was like K-pop was not a thing back then, and I just enjoyed it. And I just hated biology. I didn't want to take bio because I needed it to get into uni. So they said you could take a language, and I took Korean. So when I got into my university and I took my classes, I realized I could take a language as a credit that would count. So I took Korean, and I ended up becoming the president of the Korean Cultural Association at my school. But it was
And she's not Korean. Can you
I know.
tell?
I know it's weird. It's funny, but that was like for all different kinds of people, and that was still right before K-pop. I feel like now the Korean wave is huge. Like K-pop and K-dramas are huge, but like still back then it wasn't that common. Like it was still people were like, "Oh my God, you speak Korean? You watch K-dramas? What are those?" Like it was still weird for people, but I just liked watching them because they were such great stress relief. Like I had a busy lifestyle, so they were like a great way to kind of just relax. So yeah, I speak. I'm fluent in. Well, I used to be much more fluent in reading and writing. But now I can just watch without subtitles. I'm losing. I need to keep practicing. But yeah, that's my little fun fact.
So Korea has a great fashion scene, Aimon.
Yeah,
We need
that's
to
definitely.
check it out, maybe do a fashion show there.
Honestly, they do. Japan, Korea, like Asia, the Asian countries have amazing fashion. I definitely want to visit.
So when you go, let me know.
Yeah, we'll go together.
For sure. So what's next for Aimon?
What's next for me is really growing my business and my team and kind of exploring the New York area. I think that we have so much talent in Cleveland that would do so well there, and I would love for some people from there to come here. I mean, for this runway that we just did at the CMA, we had a designer from New York, we had a designer from LA Showcase, we had a boutique from Canada, we had a lot of local designers. So I do think that this is something international, as Aya always says. It's bigger than just Cleveland. It's the whole industry, especially with us aiming to bring more real diversity and inclusion within the fashion industry. I think it's really needed. But yeah, our future, we just have events coming up a lot this week actually. We have our services that are going to be rolling out that people will actually know about. And then we will hopefully, and I'm just putting this out there, I'm hoping that I can plan something during New York Fashion Week time in 2023, September.
Yes, it will happen.
Yes, I'm just saying that right now to hold myself accountable.
So after we recorded this interview, Aimon went to New York to do her first collaborative event. So we decided to do a part 2 with a post-event recap. Welcome back, Aimon.
Hello again.
So tell us about your experience in New York City.
Yeah, I had a great experience. I learned a lot. You never know how something is going to be until you do it. I was preparing for a lot of things, but there were so many things that while the events were happening that I had to do and I learned. And then it was New York. It was a whole other city. So it was great. Really met some great people, had a great experience, and really just learned a lot for whatever I do in New York next.
That's so exciting. Isn't New York such an amazing city? And the people there really recognize talent from outside of New York.
Yeah,
right?
there's just so much to do. There's so many people to meet. There's so many opportunities. So it's so great to be able to really do something on a smaller scale with a different, organization before I go off on my own and really kind of feel the water and be like, okay, let's see how it goes in New York. And it's a big city, reminds me of Toronto, reminds me of home, and the people do too. So it was just so exciting.
So what were the highlights of your trip?
I mean, the highlights, for sure, it was the people that I was around. The creatives that came with me from Cleveland to New York were so amazing and so talented. We also did a really cool shopping event at Kendra Scott in Soho. That was really fun, and I got to meet a lot of the people, that I had met in New York previously during Fashion Week because I was like, hey, y'all, I'm in town, please come by. And they did. And it was so great to reconnect with people from New York and have them meet talent from Cleveland. And then we did like a photo shoot for the vendors that came with me on the third day. And it's just so great to see like how many spots there are in New York to just get creative shots and results. So I think that was really fun.
And I saw in your feed you went to this fabulous restaurant.
I did. So I
Talk about it because
Yes,
I
oh
want to
my
go.
God. You have to go. It's amazing. So I had the honor of being hosted by Janoon, which is a Michelin star restaurant in New York City. It is an Indian restaurant. They also have a halal meat, and I eat halal, but it's just such a great experience. Amazing, amazing food, amazing dessert, great service. I would highly recommend it. And it was interesting, and I thought of you actually, Aya, because one of their, I think, head chefs is Filipino.
Oh,
So it was just such a cool experience, really.
so what was the name of the restaurant?
Janoon.
Janoon. It's in Manhattan,
Yes, if I'm not
and
mistaken.
it is a Michelin star
Yes,
restaurant.
it is.
Wow. Okay, we need to drop that in the links as well.
Yes, definitely.
So I know in our first part of the interview, Eamon put it out there that eventually next year she will be part of the New York Fashion Week, right?
Yes, I want to do something during the timeline of New York Fashion Week, and then hopefully one day I'll be part of their official schedule. But for now, there's a lot of events that happen during the same timeline, and I want to do something that can give more exposure to creatives in Cleveland and other spaces as well, like maybe Canada and other states here, but really want to take them there and do something very creative, maybe like a fashion presentation, not really a full runway show. Who knows? Maybe in like 6 months I'll be like, you know what, I'm doing a full runway show in New York, but not
Of
yet.
course, it's Eamon.
Yeah, so for now, something smaller, something very unique, something that's just gonna blow people away.
So you mentioned earlier that you felt really welcome in New York City in the fashion scene. I mean, can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think as a young female of color, New York really reminds me of home, as I mentioned. And in Toronto, there's just so much diversity, so many different people from different walks of life that it's so normal. You don't stand out in a way that is like alienating. So when I was in New York, I felt like, oh, there's so many other people that are so different, that have different experiences. Like I kind of blend right in. And people really, they have a fashion industry there, so they know about fashion. So like when I talk about something, a lot of people understand what I'm saying. Whereas in Cleveland in the beginning it was much harder because we don't have a fashion industry here. A lot of people don't understand certain things. Like when I say, oh, I'm doing a runway show in New York, people would be like, amazing. Who are the designers? Where are you doing it? Who are the sponsors? Whereas in Cleveland, the question would be, how are you getting the clothes? But
Or
I'm not,
why?
or why? Yeah, but I'm not getting the clothes. Where I'm organizing so a designer can design a collection to showcase to the audience. So it's just a different level of understanding. But it's also because obviously New York is like the fashion hub. It's a major city. There's so many people, diversity, fashion schools. Like it's just known to them. Whereas Cleveland is still learning, but definitely has so much potential.
Yes, and you showed that during the Cleveland Museum Art Fashion Show, right?
Yes, that was a great experience.
So I'm really happy that Eamon is here. And Eamon, what's next, and where can we find you on social?
Yeah, so up next, we are focusing on some of the services we provide. So we do styled shoots for brands, for products, whether it's for their team or a designer and their clothing. We do websites. I do some mentoring. So we have just stuff like that happening right now while we plan our next big event that would most likely happen in June or July of 2023. And you can always find me on social media at Aimon Ali. So that's AIMON.ALI, or at _fashion talks. And you can find our, website there, our emails on our Instagram, and you can DM us. So hopefully reach out if you have any questions.
Oh, follow-up question.
Yes.
For your fashion styling shoots or styled shoots,
Yeah.
do you travel outside of Cleveland? Because
Yes.
I mean, I saw Eamon's magazine that she created. It's top notch. So I'm sure when people see that, they probably are you open to travel?
Yes, so we do plan on travel. We do hope to have some clients in New York soon. So honestly, anywhere. We're open to travel anywhere as long as it's a brand that we feel like we would love to help and we can really benefit, then we're open to travel.
Great. Thank you, Eamon.
Thank you for having me.
That was Aimon Ali of Fashion Talks. Thanks for listening to this episode of Architect My Life, a podcast brought to you by the MGS Global Group. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you would like to add to the conversation through your own experiences, I encourage you to be a guest on one of our upcoming episodes. Visit architectmylife.com/apply to learn how. I firmly believe that a strong community drives change and fosters success. If you'd like to be part of this community, join the All-Female Architect My Life Facebook group. Please take a moment to review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'd love to hear from you. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at aya_architectmylife and Architect My Life Podcast. Thanks again for listening. I'm Aya Shlachter. Until next time.